Soldiers, you have in 15 days won 6 victories, taken 21 stand of colors, 55 pieces of cannon, and several fortresses, and overrun the richest parts of Piedmont. You have gained battles without cannons, passed rivers without bridges, performed forced marches without shoes, and bivouacked without strong liquors, and often without bread. Thanks to you, soldiers, for your perseverance. Your grateful country owes its safety to you. But soldiers, you have yet done nothing, for there remains much to do. The army of the Kingdom of Sardinia was crushed. Bonaparte now focused all of his attention on General Beaulieu's Austrian army. In the last days of April 1796, the belligerents were actively preparing for a decisive battle. General Beaulieu believed that after the first stage of the campaign, the French would need time to restore their powers. During that break, Beaulieu had hoped to get additional reinforcement from Tyrol. The Austrian general decided to wait for the arrival of reinforcements to his fortified position near Tortona. He gathered 27,000 soldiers here. However, Beaulieu was mistaken. Bonaparte decided not to lose the speed of the campaign and give not a single day to the Austrians to take rest. After being reinforced with an insignificant number of soldiers, Bonaparte started the march, leading his 36,000 soldiers. I have an intention to overtake the Austrians and wreck them even before you will reply to this letter. On April 30th, the French divisions were already on the march. La Harpe moved toward Acqui. Massena and Augereau moved toward Tortona. The Austrians did not expect such a rapid resumption of the campaign. Having learned of Bonaparte's offensive, General Beaulieu changed his plan. He decided to retreat to the opposite bank of the river Po and take an advantageous position on the plain near Valenza. In this position, Beaulieu would control a very important crossing of the river Po. In addition, on this plain, Beaulieu could completely use his intimidating cavalry, which significantly outnumbered the French cavalry. Also, Beaulieu had an advantage in artillery. In the fight on the plain, this would be a significant advantage. Thus, General Beaulieu forced Bonaparte to plan his river crossing at the spot controlled by the Austrians. The Austrian general was completely assured in his position. Moreover, in the case of necessity, General Beaulieu could retreat without let or hindrance to take a more advantageous position behind the river Ticino. In early May, the French divisions started to gather near the river Po. Bonaparte faced a difficult task. It was necessary to cross a wide river without having the means. Also, his enemy controlled the cross near Valenza and was fully ready to attack the French on the opposite bank of the river. Despite all threats, Bonaparte continued to concentrate soldiers near Valenza. The Austrians had no doubts that the French would cross the river Po exactly at this location. However, Bonaparte acted completely unexpectedly further on. He ordered General Serrurier to begin distractive maneuvers near Valenza. In the meantime, near the Castiglione village, Bonaparte formed an elite corps consisting of 5,000 men. This corps included only the best grenadier and carbineer companies. These were the bravest soldiers. According to Bonaparte's plan, this elite corps had to make a forced march to Piacenza, force the river, and seize a bridgehead on the opposite bank of the river. The rest of the French divisions would immediately follow the avant-garde corps. In case of success, Beaulieu's position would be extremely vulnerable. The rear and supply bases of the Austrian army would be at risk of attack. This maneuver would ruin all Austrian plans and put them into a very non-advantageous position. Bonaparte assigned the bravest officers to complete this risky maneuver. General d'Allemagne took command of the corps. Lanus commanded the Carabiniers, and the Grenadier companies were commanded by a colonel who had already showed himself well in the Battle of Dago. I command Citizen Lannes to go to Castiglione immediately and take command over the Grenadier companies as a part of the avant-garde corps. And Bonaparte wasn't mistaken by assigning these officers. The soldiers named this corps the Hellish Column. Even enemies admired the bravery with which Lannes' grenadiers fought. The preparations were actively ongoing. General Beaulieu did not suspect anything. He rested, assured that everything would be decided near Valenza. Bonaparte was terrific at hiding his true plans from the enemy. Preparatory maneuvers finished on May 5th, and the avant-garde corps started their march at dawn the next day. Soldiers marched through Stradella directly to Piacenza. The soldiers walked over 30 miles in 36 hours. Having broken into Piacenza, the soldiers immediately seized the boats and started crossing the river. However, the enemy reacted sooner than expected. As soon as Beaulieu found out about the French who appeared in Piacenza, he immediately sent General Liptai's corps of 8,000 soldiers to protect the bridgehead. However, the main Austrian forces remained where they were because Beaulieu was still assured that the main river crossing would be near Valenza. In the meantime, the French avant-garde had already crossed the river Po. Colonel Lannes landed on the bank first, and his grenadiers immediately rushed into battle with the enemy's avant-garde. On May 7th, each side fought a series of battles for the bridgehead. Lannes and his grenadiers were assuredly broadening the bridgehead. Le Harpe's division was already approaching Piacenza. Bassano and Augereau also marched in this direction. Everything was going according to plan. Finally, General Beaulieu understood what was happening and ordered his army to move to help Liptai. However, the Austrian army's position grew very dangerous. The French continued to cross the river Po very actively. On May 8th, the Austrians decided to hold the French. General Liptai, with his corps, took a defensive position near the village of Fombio. He expected to wait in this position until General Beaulieu's main forces arrived. However, no matter how hard the Austrian generals tried, Bonaparte's concentration of forces continued to outpace them. Le Harpe's division had enough time to cross the river, and at 1 p.m., Bonaparte made a crushing strike on General Liptai's corps. The French attacked in 3 columns. In the center, Le Harpe decisively led his division to the frontal attack in the village of Fombio. Lannes attacked from the left flank, and Lanus attacked from the right. After a bloody assault, they broke the Austrian defense. General Liptai's corps retreated, but Lannes energetically pursued them. The battle continued into the late evening, and in the skirmish of the late fight, the French army had one unfortunate event. Division General Le Harpe died tragically. But despite this loss, the French gained what they wanted. They had completely crushed Liptai's corps before the main reinforcements appeared. Thus, the French army successfully forced the river Po. Beaulieu's defensive position fell. My dear friend, we finally crossed the river Po. The second campaign started. Beaulieu is confused and retreats. Probably he would want to fight again because this man is cheeky enough. What we seized from the enemy is countless. We have several warehouses with wheat and flour. My soldiers eat fresh meat, and we also have a large stock of good wine. Discipline is being restored every day. Nevertheless, we still often have to shoot. If things go well enough, I can send you several million to Paris. This money will not be superfluous in the army of the Rhine. After the defeat near the village of Fombio, the Austrians had no chance of stopping Bonaparte. General Beaulieu decided to save himself and quickly retreat to Lodi so he could cross the Adda River there and stand up in defense. But Bonaparte did not stop. Having finished the river crossing, the French started to chase the Austrians. Lannes, Augereau, and Bassano started a forced march to Lodi. By that time, the Austrians had forced the Adda River, and so Beaulieu thought that his army was saved. The only bridge across the river was guarded by 7,000 of General Siebutendorf's soldiers. Beaulieu led the rest of the soldiers to the city of Crema. Here, he planned to bring his army to order, get some rest, and wait for reinforcements. Beaulieu was still hoping to save his positions behind the Adda River, but Bonaparte had different plans. After arriving in Lodi, he decided to seize the bridge and strike the Austrian army again. Bonaparte ordered all his artillery brought to the bank. In the shortest manner, he was able to gather 24 cannons, and the French cannoneers immediately opened fire. The Austrians opened fire in return. An artillery duel began. At the same time, Bonaparte ordered his troops to form a grenadier column behind the city's walls to make a rapid attack. General Bouman's cavalry was sent up the river to look for a river ford. At 5 p.m., artillery fire started to cease. Many Austrians decided that the battle was coming to an end, but suddenly the attack signal sounded,
La charge!
And the grenadier column appeared from the cover, rushed to the bridge. The Austrians did not expect the attack. However, while the column was crossing the 150-meter-long bridge, the Austrian cannoneers were able to load their guns and fire a salvo across the bridge. As a result, dense rows of the French were torn. The column stopped, and the soldiers hesitated, waiting for the second Austrian salvo. Some soldiers jumped into the river. However, at this indecisive moment, something unexpected happened. The leader of the army headquarters rushed the bridge to encourage the soldiers, and Berthier's unexpected bravery had an explosive effect. Following Berthier, Massena also rushed to the bridge, followed by Lannoy, Lannes, and Cervoni. The generals grabbed the banners and rushed ahead screaming. Seeing the army headquarters leader and division generals on the bridge holding banners in their hands, the soldiers experienced an instant influx of strength and rushed into the attack with full decisiveness. Some of the soldiers jumped off the bridge near the farthest bank and opened fire, shooting the Austrian cannoneers. Being covered by this fire, the grenadier column slipped through the bridge and immediately attacked the Austrians' positions. After an arduous battle, the French were able to push the Austrians back from the bridge. Still, General Siebutendorf did not want to retreat from their position. After bringing in reserve battalions, General Siebutendorf counterattacked. Bonaparte instantaneously reacted and introduced Augereau's division into the battle. Also, the French cavalry appeared on the flank. General Bouman quickly decided to attack the Austrian right flank. Massena and Augereau repeated their attack on the center, and General Siebutendorf could not withstand this anymore. The Austrians quailed and retreated toward the city of Crema. The French pursued them until the evening, by which time they seized 1,700 POWs. In total, the Austrians lost 2,000 soldiers and 17 cannons. The French lost around 500 soldiers. General Beaulieu, who dreamt of getting some rest, had to retreat again, and his morale was completely devastated. The Austrian generals were shocked by the course of events. Bonaparte gained another victory, and this victory had a huge impact on French morale. These days, the French army gained the feeling of absolute belief in victory and their warlord. After the Battle of Lodi, Bonaparte irreversibly won the hearts of his soldiers. Another of Bonaparte's offensives ended successfully. Beaulieu's crushed army retreated from Lombardy, and 5 days after the Battle of Lodi, the French headed towards Milan. On May 15th, on a sunny Sunday morning, Bonaparte entered Milan under roaring applause and an endless number of flowers. The residents of Milan greeted the French with unimaginable delight. We are in Milan today. Our triumphant entrance into the city reminded me of how ancient warlords entered Rome. I doubt that I have ever seen a more delightful and amazing image before. Milan is a very beautiful city, very large, and with many people. Their dwellers love the French insanely, and it is impossible to talk about all the signs of loyalty that they showed us. Our successes are truly unbelievable. They will perpetuate the name of General Bonaparte, and one needs not have any illusions. We owe our victories only to him. Any other person in his place would be defeated, but he gains one victory after another. This campaign is the most beautiful and successful of all campaigns that were ever undertaken. That is a true picture of our position. However, despite all victories and successes, the French rejoiced too early. A true battle for Italy was only about to begin. May 1796. After victory in the Battle of Lodi, Bonaparte triumphantly entered Milan. These days, the three-color flag was flying over the capital of Lombardy. The French army also controlled Pavia, Cremona, and the main crossings of the river Adda. In this situation, General Beaulieu had to retreat again. This time, he retreated toward the Mincio River to a good defensive position, which was covered from the south by a powerful Mantua fortress and from the north by Lake Garda. For the Austrians, it was the last stance of defense in northern Italy. However, Bonaparte wasn't in a hurry to attack the Austrians in their defensive position. Before launching the new offensive, he decided to rest his troops. Also, during the retreat, the Austrians left a 2,000 large garrison in the fortress of Milan, which the French had to block. The offensive on Beaulieu was planned for May 22nd. However, Bonaparte's plans were suddenly on the verge of collapse. A dispatch came from Paris, the content of which might not only ruin the entire campaign, but also destroy Bonaparte's military career. The Directory members informed Bonaparte that the Italian army would be divided into two independent armies. Bonaparte's first army would attack Rome because then Pope Pius VI was considered the main ideological enemy of the French Revolution and its principles. And the second army, commanded by General Kellerman, would hold Lombardy. For Bonaparte, it was obvious that such a plan would ruin the entire campaign. Moreover, he considered it critically unacceptable to divide the army, which faced a not yet defeated enemy and was expecting large reinforcements very soon. Bonaparte immediately replied to the Directory. Kellerman will indeed command the army as well as me, but I believe that uniting Kellerman and me in Italy would mean losing everything. I will not be able to serve the army with a man who considers himself the first general in Europe. Also, I believe one bad commander is better than two good ones. War, the same as management, is a matter of tactfulness. In addition to these words, Bonaparte wrote that he would be forced to resign if the government decides not to change its plans. And this answer made the right impression in Paris. Bonaparte's glory was high, so his resignation could lead to unrest and dangerous consequences for the government. Eventually, the members of the Directory decided not to take the risk. The Directory thoroughly discussed the issue and solved it positively. Your plan is the only correct one, which should be followed. Eternal glory to the winner of the Battle of Lodi. Thus, Bonaparte received what he wanted. He remained the only army commander on the Italian front and received the freedom of action. Moreover, his army finally received much anticipated reinforcement, so Bonaparte actively prepared for a new attack. Thanks to the reinforcements, Bonaparte strengthened three main divisions and formed a new 4th division headed by General Kielmaine. Another supportive division covered rearward and blocked the Austrian garrison, which set up a defense in the Milan fortress. In addition to army reorganization, Bonaparte continued to pay much attention to the soldiers' provisions because they still faced significant hardships and needed many things. This frequently led to lower morale and was the main reason for looting. However, this issue was decided promptly and effectively. Bonaparte forced the Dukes of Modena and Toscana to pay significant contributions. Thanks to these measures, the soldiers, for the first time in 3 years, started receiving their wages in specie. It was an unbelievable occurrence for the army and a very generous gift to soldiers. From the memories of the captain of the 32nd Infantry Regiment, when I saw my 60 francs, I felt like a rich man. On May 20th, the main preparations were finished and the troops received the order to concentrate on the Adda River. Bonaparte planned to attack with 4 divisions. In total, he was able to concentrate 32,000 soldiers for this attack. By that time, the Austrians also received reinforcements, and General Beaulieu had 28,000 soldiers. On May 22nd, Bonaparte started his all-out offensive. However, something unexpected happened again. As soon as his troops started moving, very concerning news arrived from Pavia. In this city, The residents, instigated by the Austrian agents, started a rebellion. There was also a tense situation in Milan. As a result, all army communications were in danger. Under these circumstances, the offensive was impossible, and Bonaparte immediately returned to Milan. Order in the city was restored promptly and effortlessly. However, the situation in Pavia was significantly worse. The rebellious citizens started to kill the French soldiers. There was a true uprising in the city, and the French garrison quartered in Pavia had to surrender. In response, Bonaparte ordered troops to Pavia immediately. In such a situation, Bonaparte decided to teach everyone a harsh lesson so as to prevent similar revolts in the future. On May 26th, 2,000 soldiers approached the city gates. The French offered the revolters an option to lay down their weapons and surrender, but they refused. So the French troops crashed the gates and broke into the city in an assault which lasted a few hours. As a result, many participants in the revolt were shot and the city was looted. After such harsh measures, order in Pavia was restored, and Bonaparte went to Brescia to command the continuing attack. The French troops continued to advance at a quick pace. By this time, Chielmain's division reached Montichiari. Augereau was approaching Lonato. The division of Serrulier was moving further south. The Austrian troops were standing in the defense position behind the Mincio River. This river had 4 bridges, but General Beaulieu decided to defend, not destroy them. In this position, Beaulieu worried most for the right flank, because if the French broke in near Peschiera, the retreat routes to the north would be blocked, and retreating to Tyrol would be impossible. Because of that, Beaulieu concentrated 4,000 General Liptai soldiers near Peschiera, which was supported by the reserves of Milas. The left flank was covered by Fortress Mantua. The central bridges near Borghetto and Goito were guarded by 8,000 of General Sebatendorf's soldiers. On May 29th, Bonaparte started to concentrate forces near Peschiera. These maneuvers had convinced the Austrians even more that the French would try to break in from the north. However, the Austrians' situation was complicated by the fact that General Beaulieu got sick that day and was practically unable to command his troops. Therefore, confusion increased in the Austrian headquarters and the cooperation among the troops worsened. Finally, on May 30th, in the early morning, the division of General Augereau started to approach Peschiera. The Austrians had already prepared for the battle on the right flank, but Bonaparte, to everyone's surprise, suddenly attacked Borghetto. At 9 a.m., the Chielmain's division rapidly attacked the Austrians in this position. Again, French grenadiers were on the verge of this attack, attacking with incredible courage and decisiveness. In this battle, Brigadier General Gardon was distinguished particularly. He headed the squad of the grenadiers and was the first to burst onto the opposite bank. After intense hand-to-hand combat, the French moved the Austrians back and took control of the bridge. At this time, the division of Augereau was attacking the right flank of the Austrians. Massena received the order to support the attack on Borghetto immediately. Having learned of the French breakthrough, General Sebatendorf counterattacked with the available reserves, but to no success. Massena's troops approached Borghetto, entered the battle, and pushed the Austrians back to Villafranca. Thus, the Austrian defense was broken down just in a matter of several hours. In this situation, General Beaulieu was again discouraged and completely lost hope for success. Eventually, not thinking too long, he ordered his troops to retreat. The main part of the Austrian army retreated north. To cover the retreat, General Beaulieu moved all available reserves to hold Peschiera and Villafranca. The remaining Austrian army, which was on the left flank, received the order to retreat to Fortress Mantua and join the local garrison. On the evening of May 30th, the Austrian army retreated from all of its positions on the Mincio River. On this day, the Austrians suffered 600 dead or wounded. The French lost around 500 men. The next day, Bonaparte ordered Masseno's division to move to Verona, while he, together with the divisions of Serrurier and Augereau, moved toward Mantua. On June 1st, Bonaparte sent a message to Paris telling about another victory. The Austrians were completely expelled from Italy. Our outposts are located in the mountains of Tyrol. I will not name every soldier who revealed himself on this day, but I can tell you that all of the grenadiers of the vanguard are now covered with glory. They are simply mocking death. Nothing compares to their fearlessness. Thus, Bonaparte completely defeated General Beaulieu, not leaving him a single chance. But now, he had a new task. He had to seize the very powerful fortress of Mantua, which had 13,000 Austrian soldiers in garrison. Also, this fortress had 315 cannons, 300 tons of powder, and a huge stock of food. It was impossible to walk by Mantua. Additionally, he had to deal with this issue as soon as possible because no one doubted that the Austrians would return with renewed vigor very soon. In less than 2 months after the start of the campaign, the Austrian army was forced to retreat from Italy. By June 1796, the French outposts were already located in the mountains of Tyrol. Despite these achievements, Bonaparte didn't have an opportunity to enjoy the results of his victories. For the first time since the start of the campaign, the French commander-in-chief encountered an obstacle that didn't give him the possibility to plan future offensive action. This obstacle was the Mantua fortress. Mantua had a powerful Austrian garrison with a large food supply. Thus, after the French army forced the Mincio River, Bonaparte ordered the blockage of this fortress immediately. He ordered to do it to the division of Serrurier. On June 4th, the French blocked this fortress from all sides and immediately attempted an assault. In an intense fight, the French seized the eastern fortifications of Mantua. However, despite all efforts, they failed to capture the remaining fortifications. The Austrians steadfastly defended their positions and refused to consider any surrender terms. Thus, it became obvious that they wouldn't be able to seize the fortress without a full-fledged siege. Therefore, in the first days of July, the French were forced to start preparations to besiege Mantua. Meanwhile, during these preparations, Bonaparte decided to deal with secondary tasks. First of all, he decided to fulfill the government's order and liquidate the threat coming from Rome. To fulfill this task, General Augereau received the order to move his division to the south. To support Augereau, another division, led by General Vaubois, was also sent. On June 19th, the French soldiers entered the territory of Papal dominions and took Bologna. The information about this promptly reached Rome. These measures turned out to be enough to make Pope Pius V change his attitudes toward the French Republic. 4 days after the French entered Bologna, the Pope offered a truce. Bonaparte accepted this offer. However, according to the conditions of this truce, the Pope had to pay 21 million francs as a contribution and was obliged to pass 100 pieces of art from the museums of Rome to Paris. Also, the French took Livorno under their control, thus depriving the British fleet of a convenient Mediterranean base. Having coped with the government's order, Bonaparte focused his attention on Milan because the Austrian garrison was still in the city's citadel. The French unsuccessfully attempted to force a surrender for over a month. Bonaparte ordered to send all the heavy artillery to Milan immediately, which the French seized in Livorno and Bologna. As a result, on June 29th, the Austrian garrison, being threatened with complete destruction, surrendered on honorary terms. Thus, Bonaparte was able to successfully fulfill all secondary tasks in the short term and now was able to concentrate all his efforts on the siege of Mantua. Meanwhile, when the French were busy with the siege, the Austrians were actively preparing for a new offensive. By order of the Austrian government, 25,000 soldiers from the main front were transferred to Tyrol. Also, significant reinforcements were sent here from other areas. The Austrians planned to concentrate a nearly 50,000-man army in Tyrol. Instead of General Beaulieu, they put Field Marshal Wurmser to command this army. He was a very experienced and brave commander. Nobody doubted that Wurmser, as the head of such a powerful army, would completely crush Bonaparte. By mid-July, Bonaparte also received reinforcements. His entire army, consisting of 42,000 soldiers, was concentrated to the north of Mantua. The fortress was besieged by Serulier's soldiers. Massena was defending Verona. Augereau took the position near Legnago. Sauré's division was covering Brescia. Despinoa was in Peschiera. Bonaparte knew that Wurmser arrived at Tyrol with significant reinforcements and that their preparations would end soon. However, there was still a chance that the French would have enough time to capture Mantua. On the night of July 17th, the French attempted another assault. Under cover of darkness, the French soldiers moved their boats across the lower lake and attacked the Austrians' southern fortifications. However, all their boats ran aground, and this attempt failed. After that, Bonaparte ordered a massive bombardment of Mantua using all of his cannons. Day after day, Mantua was shelled by 170 cannons. The army focused its firepower on the fortifications of Milareto. Finally, on July 29th, the walls of the fortress were breached enough by French artillery to start an assault. But the assault never happened. On that very same day, Bonaparte received a message that the enemy's army was approaching from the Tyrol Mountains to Mantua. That was the thing that Bonaparte feared most. Wurmser attacked very decisively. At dawn on July 29th, Massena's division battled against the attacking Austrians. However, his troops were overpowered. Joubert's brigade from Massena's division was very promptly pushed from Rivoli. The pressure of the Austrians was so powerful that Massena's entire division had to retreat from Verona. I have never seen the Austrians fight so fiercely. They all were drunk. Also, the French found out that another column of the enemy was moving from the east. After the first reports of the enemy's movement were received, Bonaparte concluded that the Austrians had attacked from two directions. In such a situation, he planned to concentrate his troops between Peschiera and Verona to fight Wurmser back. But then another message arrived which caused alarm in the French headquarters. General Sauré reported that the enemy's troops outnumbered and overwhelmed his troops. This Austrian attack was forcing him to retreat from all positions. Only a small French detachment commanded by General Guillou barricaded itself in Salò and continued the defense. After that, the Austrians were able to seize Brescia. Many wounded French soldiers who were in infirmaries in this city were captured. Murat and Lens were among them. The first stage of the Austrian attack was more than successful. The further plan of the Austrians included the attack with 3 corps. The main corps, consisting of 24,000 soldiers under Wurmser's command, had to attack through Verona directly to Mantua. The Second Corps of 18,000 soldiers, commanded by Quosdanovich, had to attack through Brescia. The Third Corps, consisting of 5,000 soldiers, was approaching from the east. In total, Wurmser was able to enact nearly 60,000 soldiers for this operation, including Mantua's garrison. On the other hand, Bonaparte could only gather slightly over 40,000 soldiers. The French position was truly critical. It was completely clear that Sauré's division would not be able to resist Quosdanovich. That meant that if Bonaparte stayed in his position between the Mincio and Adige rivers, his army would be completely surrounded. In these hours, some of the soldiers were close to panic. However, the commander-in-chief was cold-blooded. The first thing that Bonaparte ordered was to immediately retreat to the Mincio River. After arriving at Roverbella, Bonaparte called for the military council to discuss further actions with the generals. The mood in the French headquarters was quite pessimistic. The main threat was the fact that Wurmser and Quosdanovich could unite south of Lake Garda. This would give the Austrians a decisive advantage in numbers. Some French generals offered to retreat immediately to the south and force the Po River as soon as possible. This would make it possible for the French to retreat freely to the west. But then, Division General Augereau spoke on the military council. "Of my own authority, I declare that I refuse to retreat. The division headed by me has never been crushed before. I will better die leading my soldiers than disgrace myself by a shameful retreat. If the retreat really begins, we will not be able to stop it. There will be neither order nor discipline." And Augereau was completely right. If Bonaparte started to retreat, this would lead to a disaster. So, in this very hard decision, Bonaparte decides to fight. First of all, he makes the decision to stop the Mantua siege immediately. Serrulier received the order to leave all the siege artillery there and retreat to Marcaria as soon as possible. Serrulier was ordered to hold the roads to Cremona under his control if the army would have to retreat to the south after all. Also, the maneuver of Serrulier's goal was to distract the Austrian garrison. Further on, so as not to allow the unification of the enemy's powers, Bonaparte decided to quickly concentrate his forces and take a position between Montichiari and Lonato. The second stage of the operation provided the destruction of the enemy's corps separately. The main strike had to be made on Quosdanovich's corps, while the secondary forces had to postpone the progression of Wurmser's troops. Bonaparte decided to start immediately. The orders were given the same day, and on the night of July 30th, the French army started its maneuvers. Covered by darkness, Serrulier's soldiers started their retreat from Mantua, leaving all the artillery behind. Having noticed the hasty French retreat, the Austrians decided to go after them. As a result of rearguard fights, the Serrulier's division bore significant losses. Meanwhile, the rest of the French divisions started to force the Mincio River. To cover these maneuvers, they left a small garrison in Peschiera, which had to detain Wurmser's soldiers. Bonaparte's army was in motion all night. Massena and Dispinoa were hurrying to Lonato. Augereau was moving toward Montichiari. At dawn on July 31st, General Dispinoa was first to arrive at Lonato, but nearly immediately he was attacked by an Austrian brigade and was thrown back with losses. However, the Austrians weren't in Lonato for long. The approached division of Massena swiftly counterattacked and took Lonato under its control. The Austrians had to retreat, having lost 500 men. Simultaneously with that, Bonaparte sent Sauré's division to help General Guiou, who, despite the complete absence of food, continued to defend with high persistence. Following Bonaparte's order, General Sarre broke through the Austrian flank with a swift attack. Further on the mountain roads, the French moved to Salo and freed Guiu's soldiers. After this, Sarre prepared to retreat to Desenzano. Having learned about the combat near Lonato and Salo, Quosdanovich understood that he was dealing with significant French forces. That's why he decided to be cautious and concentrate his main forces near Gavardo. By the evening of July 31st, Bonaparte's army held the following positions. Massena and Dispinoa were near Lonato. Sarre was to the north of Desenzano. Augereau was in Montacchiati. Having had rest for only a few hours, Bonaparte with Augereau's and Dispinoa's divisions made the night march again. And at 8 a.m. on August 1st, the French unexpectedly broke into Brescia and effortlessly expelled all the Austrians. As a result of that morning's attack, the French freed all their soldiers who were captivated by the Austrians. Thus, Bonaparte successfully concentrated his troops between the two groups of the enemy. In this situation, Quosdanovich and Wurmser didn't have operational communication with one another. All the orders they sent to one another could only pass through Lake Garda, and because of that, Wurmser didn't have actual information about Quosdanovich's movements. Nevertheless, the Austrian commander-in-chief received the report that the French were hastily retreating on the entire front to the west. Based on this information, Wurmser decided that the first thing he had to do was to help Mantua. On August 1st, under ringing bells, the Austrians solemnly entered the fortress. Near Mantua, the Austrians seized around 170 cannons and a huge stock of gunpowder. This made a very positive impression on Wurmser. He was assured that this was a complete victory and that the main goal of his campaign was fulfilled. So, on August 2nd, he calmly stayed in Mantua, only sending the squad of General Liptai to follow Bonaparte, who was retreating. However, Bonaparte was not retreating. Wurmser's slow pace, coupled with Quosdanovich's indecisiveness, gave Bonaparte precious time to restore his powers. On August 2nd, Bonaparte held the previous positions and was concentrating forces all day to hit Quosdanovich. However, in the second part of the day, he received a message that the enemy had attacked Castiglione. The French that were standing there retreated chaotically. Also, the Austrians seized Peschiera. However, Bonaparte didn't change his plans. On the morning of August 3rd, Bonaparte started the counterattack on Quosdanovich from all directions. Despinoa attacked the Austrian positions near Gavardo. General Sarre, supported by the reserves, attacked Salo. Along with these attacks, General Augereau, reinforced with Kilmain's cavalry division, attacked the Austrians at Castiglione. The strike was so powerful that Liptai's soldiers were pushed back several kilometers. However, the Austrians very promptly transferred their reserves and restarted their attack. Augereau had to start defending. Bonaparte ordered Augereau to hold the Austrians at Castiglione at any price. Meanwhile, Quosdanovich started the attack with all of his forces, unexpectedly for the French. On that day, he attempted again to break through to Wurmser's army. Eventually, the French were counterattacked in all directions. Moreover, one of the Austrian brigades threw the French back and again took control over Lonato. In this critical moment, Wurmser and Quosdanovich were separated by only 8 kilometers. However, Bonaparte instantly reacted to this threat and personally brought the reserves to Lonato. This reserve was the famous 32nd Half Brigade from the division of Massena. Forming the soldiers in a column, Bonaparte ordered them to take back control over Lonato immediately. Soldiers, go ahead on this road straight to Lonato and burst inside there, no matter what. Do not shoot. only fight with your bayonets. The 32nd Half Brigade proved that your fame is justified, and the 32nd Half Brigade rushed to Lonato. General Rampon was heading the column. This attack was supported by the 18th Half Brigade and the 15th Dragoon Regiment. In the short term, the Austrian brigade was defeated and thrown back to Desenzano. Near Desenzano, the Austrians were blocked from all sides. Thanks only to the reserves that arrived for their help, the rest of the brigade were able to save themselves. Quosdanovich, having found out that the defeat of his brigade in Lonato stopped the attack and ordered all of his troops to retreat again to Gavardo. However, very soon, the Austrians were attacked again from all directions. Sauret repeated his attacks on the right flank. Despinoa attacked in the center. Fierce fights were going on these mountain frontiers all day long. Finally, Quosdanovich was not able to withstand Bonaparte's pressure anymore. Having gathered the military council, he adopted the decision to retreat to the north. Wurmser's soldiers also did not have any success that day. For 16 hours, Augereau's division was desperately fighting even though being outnumbered by enemy forces. All of the Austrian attempts to break through the French defense near Castiglione failed. General Augereau won immortal glory in this battle. Thus, as a result of the fights on August 3rd near Lonato, Gavardo, and Salo, Quosdanovich was forced to retreat to the north. Now, Bonaparte had an opportunity to concentrate all his forces against Wurmser. On August 4th, Masséna's division was already near Lonato and was preparing to move forward to Castiglione. Moreover, Bonaparte sent the order to Serrurier to march towards Castiglione on the night of August 4th and attack the rear of the Austrian army. Serrurier was seriously sick that day, so General Fiorella took command of the division and ordered the soldiers to begin preparing for the 30-kilometer march to Castiglione immediately. The rest of the French troops that day were pursuing the Austrians that were retreating to the north. During this retreat, Quosdanovich wasn't able to coordinate his troops. As a result, 3 of his battalions were surrounded by the French near Gavardo. In this situation, Austrians attempted to break through to the south, hoping to meet Wurmser's soldiers there. But this attempt ended in complete failure. In the end, near Lonato, 3 Austrian battalions were captured by the French. Meanwhile, Wurmser still didn't have exact information about what happened to Quosdanovich. Because of that reason, the Austrian commander-in-chief didn't recognize the danger of his situation and mistakenly thought that the advantage was still on his side. On August 4th, Wurmser spent the whole day gathering his forces for the upcoming battle with the French. In the early morning, the Austrian artillery opened fire. Bonaparte, together with Masséna's and Augereau's divisions, was already in position. Quilmain's cavalry was put on the back of the right flank. The approach of Fiorella's division was expected soon. Having concentrated 3 divisions, Bonaparte had around 30,000 soldiers on the battlefield. Wurmser was able to concentrate 25,000 soldiers. His army took the positions on the heights between Solferino and Maidole. The soldiers were put in 2 lines. Bonaparte didn't rush to attack because he was waiting for the 3rd Division to arrive, which was supposed to attack the rear of the Austrians. The lack of French action at the beginning of the battle filled Wurmser with even more hope. However, that didn't last. Having found out that reinforcements were already nearby, Bonaparte decided to make a crushing hit on the Austrian left flank. Finally, the signal to attack rang, and 3 grenadier battalions commanded by General Verdier rushed into an attack. This attack was supported by Marmont's artillery and Quilmain's cavalry. The fire of the Austrian artillery did not stop the French even for a second. Verdier's grenadiers confidently broke into the heights and, after a fierce fight, broke through the Austrian flank. At this very same time, Fiorella's division started to approach from the side of Louis di Zolo. The Austrians clearly didn't expect such a development. However, Wurmser wasn't confused. He immediately turned his soldiers up the second line and assuredly attacked the French, who were approaching from the rear. At this moment, Bonaparte had increased the pressure even more. Massena and Augereau started the attack on the entire front. The position of the Austrian army started to be very dangerous. The left flank was practically defeated. The right flank was under a powerful attack by Massena's division. The risk of the breakthrough of the French to Solferino increased every minute. In the given situation, Wurmser understood very clearly that he had overestimated his strength and gave the order to retreat immediately. This decision was absolutely correct. If Wurmser had continued the battle, Bonaparte would have completely destroyed his army. The Austrians were retreating very organized, being covered by a large number of cavalry. Also, the French were too exhausted to organize an active pursuit. We were not getting off the backs of our horses for 8 days. We were totally exhausted physically, and our horses were half dead from the tiredness. Yet, the Austrian losses that day totaled 3,000 dead and captive. The French lost approximately 1,300 men in the battle. The next day, Wurmser's soldiers retreated behind the Mincio River. However, they had no chance of holding this position. On August 6th, Massena attacked the Austrians again near Peschiera. After that, Wurmser adopted the final decision to retreat back to Tyrol. Before the retreat, Wurmser filled the supply of food in Mantua and sent several more brigades there. On August 7th, the French took Verona, and several days later, Mantua was again under French siege. The first attack of the Austrians ended this way. As a result of this entire operation, which lasted from July 29th to August 5th, the Austrians lost 16,000 men. The French losses totaled 8,000 men. Bonaparte, being in a critical situation again, showed brilliant military talents. Nevertheless, Wurmser did not consider himself defeated. The capture of Mantua was prevented, and Wurmser immediately requested the replenishment to fight Bonaparte one more time. Headquarters, Verona, August 8th, 1796. Dear Directors, the war actions were going one after another with such speed that I could not write anything to you. On August 5th, we defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Castiglione and returned to our previous positions. The enemy is retreating to Tyrol. The Austrian army, which threatened us with the invasion of Italy, disappeared like a dream. The Italian campaign continued. After the victory at the Battle of Castiglione, the French army returned to its previous positions and again besieged the Mantua fortress. In the meantime, the broken army of Field Marshal Wurmser retreated to Trento to restore its powers. The swift events in Italy affected the main front. Two French armies commanded by Generals Moreau and Jourdan finally began to attack actively. Moreau's army progressed most successfully. The current situation on the front was developing quite successfully for the French. The army of General Moreau received a good opportunity to unite in Tyrol with Bonaparte's army. Having united two armies, it was possible to start a large-scale attack on Vienna. The Directory considered this plan to be very promising and actively insisted on its implementation. However, the situation on the front was changing very rapidly. On August 24th, the Austrian army commanded by Archduke Charles unexpectedly counterattacked the army of General Jourdan. As a result of the Battle of Amberg, the forces of General Jourdan had to retreat. With these actions, Archduke Charles overtook the initiative on the front and created a menace for the flank of the army of General Moreau. At the same time, the Austrian government, recognizing the threat of uniting the armies of Moreau and Bonaparte, applied maximum effort to prevent it from happening. The reserves were urgently sent to Tyrol. This action allowed the Austrians to form an army of 45,000 men very quickly. Wurmser had a categorical order from the emperor to start the attack as soon as possible. Having received the reinforcements, Field Marshal Wurmser and his new chief of staff, Franz von Lauer, worked out a new plan of attack which had to finally destroy all intentions of the French and free the Mantua fortress. According to the new plan, the corps of 20,000 men commanded by Davidovich had to cover Tyrol. The main powers commanded by Field Marshal Wurmser had to march through the Brenta Valley and head to Mantua from the west. This would force Bonaparte to refuse the idea of going to Tyrol. The Austrian generals believed that the French would surely try to stop Wurmser's progression toward Mantua, and in this case, Davidovich's corps would strike the French from the north. By the end of August, the Austrian preparations were close to completion. By this time, Bonaparte's soldiers stood in their previous positions. The division of Massena was concentrated near Rivoli. Augereau was in Verona. Vaubois took the positions on the west bank of Lake Garda. One more division that had 10,000 soldiers blocked Mantua. General Kilmain's reserve was between Lagnago and Verona. On August 28th, the Austrian army started its maneuvers. Having left Davidovich's corps near Rovereto, Wurmser started the movement through the mountains alongside the Brenta River. Then, the Austrian field marshal planned to come to the plain and advance on Mantua through Verona. General Davidovich at this time was waiting for the right moment to start his attack as well. However, Bonaparte very promptly cracked the Austrians' plans. As soon as the news arrived that Wurmser's corps started to move west, Bonaparte decided to strike first. Kilmain was ordered to protect the bridges over the Adige River. The other three divisions had to attack the corps of Davidovich. On August 31st, Bonaparte started the counterattack. And after forced marches on September 3rd, Vaubois' division unexpectedly attacked the Austrian right flank. Davidovich was caught completely by surprise. The Austrians tried to immediately gather their troops by Rovereto. However, Massena's entire division attacked them the very next day. Vaubois continued to energetically attack from the west. Eventually, Davidovich's corps couldn't resist the pressure of the French and started to retreat. On the morning of September 5th, the French entered Trento and pushed the Austrians back even farther to the north. In 2 days of battles, Davidovich lost approximately 3,000 men, killed and wounded. Conversely, the French lost around 800 men. The news that Davidovich was attacked reached Wurmser when his soldiers were approaching Bassano, but Wurmser decided not to turn back to continue his movement ahead. He was absolutely assured that the attack on Mantua would force Bonaparte to retreat from Trento. Yet, the Austrian field marshal was completely wrong. Bonaparte didn't retreat with his army, as the Austrians expected. Having left Vaubois' division to watch the remnants of Davidovich's corps, Bonaparte sent the divisions of Augereau and Massena after Wurmser, following the same route. This was an extraordinary and brave decision. The danger of this maneuver was in the fact that if any misfortune happened, the French would be blocked in these mountains and could be left completely without supplies. However, Bonaparte was acting very decisively. Immediately after the fight with Davidovich, the French began to make the maneuver. Augereau's division was going first. Next, Masséna's division was moving. This maneuver occurred so quickly that the Austrians didn't have a chance to defend. Having covered nearly 60 miles over 2 days, Augereau's division broke in the Primolano Gorge and crushed the Austrians' rear guard. After the fight, the French progressed even further. At the end of the day, on September 7th, Bonaparte's soldiers were already 13 miles from Bassano. Wurmser was shocked by this rapid maneuver. The Austrians tried to rapidly gather all soldiers in Bassano. However, they didn't have time to do that. On the dawn of the next day, 2 French divisions attacked the Austrians from the north. Masséna attacked down on the west bank of the Brenta River, and Augereau attacked the east bank. At the same time, Colonel Lannes headed the attack to the center. As a result of this brave and energetic attack, Lannes broke through the positions of the Austrians and took Bassano in the assault. The Austrian army was divided into 2 parts. Quasdenovich's soldiers retreated to Castelfranco. Wurmser, with the biggest part of the army, ran towards Vicenza. By the end of the battle, the French seized over 4,000 POWs, 35 cannons, and 5 banners. Thus, Bonaparte's maneuver destroyed the Austrians' entire plan. On the next day, the French commander-in-chief sent news about the new victory in Paris. "We have marched through the Brenta Valley. This swift and sudden march completely confused our enemy. After that march, we destroyed the enemy near Bassano. I am asking you to give the rank of Brigadier General to Lannes. He was the first man to break into Bassano." Immediately after the battle, Bonaparte sent Augereau to Padua to cut the ways of retreating to the west for enemies. The position of the Austrians started to become very serious. They didn't have anywhere to retreat. Despite this, Field Marshal Wurmser didn't lose heart. Having regrouped his troops in Vicenza, he adopted the decision to go to Mantua. Having found out about that, Bonaparte immediately sent his divisions after the enemy. A new chase started. To get to Mantua, Wurmser would have to force the Adige River. A 3,000-man French division, commanded by General Kilmaine, stood in the way of the Austrians, and if Kilmaine could hold the bridges over the Adige River, Wurmser would be doomed. However, Kilmaine made a mistake. Thinking that the Austrians would break through Verona, he sent his troops north, along with that, not destroying the bridge near Legnago. And Wurmser immediately took advantage of this mistake. Not getting to Verona, he turned south and moved in a forced march to Legnago. Eventually, on September 10th, the Austrians forced the Adige River without obstacles. Nevertheless, Masséna continued to chase the Austrians as fast as he could. On the same day, the French vanguards forced the river near Ronco and headed south to cross the road to their enemy. On September 11th, the French vanguards, led by Murat, still overtook the Austrians. However, there were too few French troops to actually hold the enemy, so Wurmser pushed the French back and continued his way toward Mantua. Eventually, on September 12th, the Austrians broke through the French barriers and entered the fortress. This replenishment refilled the number of the garrison to 30,000 men, but there were only 23,000 soldiers capable of fighting. The rest were ill or wounded. Despite this, Wurmser was full of decisiveness to fight. Having taken the positions at the approaches to Mantua, he prepared to attack the French. And on September 15th, there was a serious battle near the walls of Mantua. However, Wurmser no longer had a chance at success. Bonaparte concentrated nearly all of his army near Mantua. I have never seen more perfect order in a battle. all our tactical movements were fulfilled with such precision that even the strictest inspector would not be able to find flaws. We were progressing and only stopping once in a while to answer the Austrians with deadly fire, but even more frequently we were throwing ourselves into bayonet fights. Eventually, our enemy retreated from the battlefield after only 1 hour, not being able to hold any of their positions. Thus, Wurmser's plan ended in complete failure. The Austrian army, which had to free Mantua, turned blocked in this fortress. Wurmser's position worsened every day. Disease was continually raging in Mantua, and the supplies ran out quickly. Nevertheless, the events on the main front were significantly more successful for the Austrians than they were in Italy. On September 19th, General Moreau's army, under the onslaught of Archduke Charles's army, started to retreat back to France. And thanks to that, the Austrians again received an opportunity to send new soldiers to Italy to help Wurmser. The Austrians started to quickly form a new army. Now it was a matter of honor for the Austrians to crush Bonaparte and free the Mantua fortress. October 1796. The French armies retreated behind the Rhine, and now the situation on the Italian front was becoming the toughest since the start of the campaign. It was completely obvious to the French that after the retreat of General Moreau's army, the Austrians could very promptly concentrate their forces against Bonaparte. Finally, 4 weeks after the Battle of Bassano, the Austrian generals were able to gather a new army of 47,000 men for a decisive offensive. Joseph Alvinci became the army's new commander. He was an experienced and brave general who had been through many battles and campaigns. Franz von Weyrother headed the Austrian army headquarters. The Austrians planned to make the offensive with 2 powerful corps from the north and east. The main goal was the same: to free the Mantua fortress and expel the French from Italy. By this time, Bonaparte couldn't fully replenish his losses, which he had in the previous battles. Despite his multiple requests for help, the French government wasn't able to swiftly send reinforcements to Italy. Nevertheless, Bonaparte used absolutely all opportunities to strengthen his army. In Milan, the French organized a temporary government that formed the Lombardy Legion, consisting of 3,000 men. They had plans to undertake similar actions in other regions. Also, to win time, Bonaparte tried to organize negotiations with the Austrians. However, these all fell into the background because in early November 1796, the Austrian army started its massive offensive. The First Corps of General Alvinci, consisting of 28,000 men, started its offensive from the east. Masséna's division was responsible for the defense of the eastern sector's front. The Second Corps of Davidovich, consisting of 18,000 men, attacked from the north. It was opposed by 9,000 men in the division of Vaubois. It was presumed that these 2 corps would crush Bonaparte's troops near Verona, after which they would go to Mantua. The fortress's garrison also had to support this attack. Bonaparte faced an extremely challenging task. Having only 40,000 soldiers, he had to hold 20,000 soldiers of Wurmser's army in Mantua and repel an attack of 47,000 soldiers from General Alvinci's army as well. The French had to undergo one of the most serious tests in the entire campaign. So, the Austrian army began an offensive. On November 2nd, Alvinci's corps were promptly approaching the Brenta River in 2 columns. At the same time, the first battles of the northern sector of the front began, and they were not in favor of the French. General Vaubois, despite all his efforts, couldn't hold the positions near Trento and had to retreat to Rovereto with serious losses. However, despite the fact that Vaubois retreated from Trento, Bonaparte was still assured that the front's northern sector was the most suitable for defensive actions. On these mountain positions, they could hold Davidovich's troops for 3 or 4 days without too much effort. During this time, Bonaparte wanted to concentrate the divisions of Augereau and Massena near Bassano and crush Alvinci's corps. So, General Vaubois received the order to take the position near Rovereto and hold Davidovich's corps for as long as possible. General Kilmain's division, which consisted of 8,000 soldiers, was ordered to hold Wurmser's troops in Mantua. Having given all the orders, Bonaparte, with the division of Augereau and the reserves, headed into the forced march to the east to fight Alvinci. The French had intended to attack the Austrians at that moment when they should have started to cross the Brenta River. On November 6th, the French divisions gathered near Vicenza, and as soon as the Austrians started crossing the river, Bonaparte began his attack. Augereau's division entered the battle with the enemy near Bassano. Massena went to Fontaniva and attacked the Austrians on the western bank of the Brenta River. In the beginning, the battle favored the French. Massena was very close to defeating the Austrians' left flank. However, Alvinci promptly reacted to this threat and strengthened the positions near Fontaniva. He also sent additional reserves to defend Bassano. Eventually, the battle, which lasted all day, did not bring the French any results. They suffered only losses of manpower. Moreover, this very evening brought gloomy news from the front's northern sector. It became known that General Vaubois hadn't held his position near Rovereto. His division was defeated and fled the battlefield in panic. Vaubois stopped his fleeing soldiers only near Rivoli. It was obvious that the front's northern sector was about to break down. This sudden news forced Bonaparte to return immediately to save the northern flank. On the night of November 7th, Bonaparte arrived at the position near Rivoli and had severely scolded the soldiers of Vaubois. "Soldiers, I'm discontented with your actions. You showed neither courage, discipline, nor perseverance. You retreated from positions where even a handful of men could have stopped an entire army." However, a scolding wasn't enough to rectify the situation, and Bonaparte had to send in additional reinforcements headed by General Joubert to help Vaubois. As a result, the total number of soldiers in Vaubois' division reached 13,000 men. Thus, the northern flank was temporarily secured. However, on the eastern flank, the menace was growing bigger since Alvinci's corps was swiftly approaching Verona. The situation became threatening, and Bonaparte had to react immediately to the new menace in the eastern sector. On November 11th, the Austrian troops were 12 miles away from Verona. Alvinci concentrated nearly 17,000 soldiers on the position near Caldiero. The rest of the troops covered the crossings over the Adige River. Bonaparte, by this time, was able to concentrate 14,000 soldiers near Verona. A few more thousand were covering the south flank. In spite of the enemy's advantage in the number of soldiers, Bonaparte decided to attack. In the early morning of November 12th, the French attacked the Austrians near Caldiero. Bonaparte's troops fought very bravely, but the forces were too unequal. Moreover, during the battle, heavy rain with hail started, which worsened the attackers' positions even more. At the end of the day, another attempt to crush Alvinci's corps was unsuccessful for the French. Having already lost around 2,000 soldiers in this battle, the French retreated to Verona. The unsuccessful Battle of Caldiero had a detrimental effect on the morale of the French soldiers. The troops were morally cracked. Deadly silence was reigning in our rows. We tried not to say aloud our impressions because of the danger of losing the respect of our comrades. Obviously, the French army's position was hopeless. The Austrians outnumbered the French in every sector of the front. In this situation, Bonaparte started having doubts about surviving. Perhaps we are standing on the verge of losing Italy. No promised reinforcements arrived. However, I will still fulfill my duty. Joubert, Lannes, Linus, Murat, Rampon, they are all injured. Perhaps the hour of the intrepid Augereau, the brave Massena, and my own death is at hand. We are abandoned in the depths of Italy. Thus, the front was on the verge of collapse, and many French officers were preparing for the worst. Yet in this critical moment, Bonaparte was able to find a way out of this deadly position. He adopted the decision to regroup his forces and, together with Augereau's and Massena's divisions, as well as with all his reserves, make a maneuver to the Ronco village. After this, he planned to force the Adige River and attack the enemy from behind. Such a maneuver, no doubt, would force General Alvinci to refuse his attack on Verona and deploy his troops to repel the attack of the French. In this offensive operation, Bonaparte was able to engage 18,000 soldiers. Alvinci had about 24,000 soldiers. So, after having left 2,000 soldiers in the Verona garrison, Bonaparte began his great maneuver. Having walked 17 miles overnight, the French reached Ronco in the early morning. Thanks to the coordinated and fast work of troops of engineers, the pontoon bridge was already erected. Soon, Augereau's division started crossing the Adige River first. This audacious maneuver of Bonaparte really concerned General Alvinci. It wasn't possible to assault Verona while the French army was still a threat to the rear. After a short consideration, Alvinci decided to stop the offensive of Verona and forward his troops against Bonaparte. Meanwhile, 2 French divisions had already crossed the Adige River using the pontoon bridge and prepared for the battle. The entire land on the northern shore between the rivers Adige and Alpone was swampy, so it was possible to move on that land only on thin dams. From Ronco, only 2 dams led through the swamps. One was along the bank of Adige, heading Belfiore. Another one was along the bank of Alpone, heading Arcole. Thus, in the early morning of November 15th, General Massena led his division ahead on the left dam. Around 9 a.m., the French threw back the enemy's advance soldiers and took the village of Bionde. Next, Massena's soldiers reached Belfiore and entered a severe battle with the Austrian division of General Provera. At this time, Augereau was moving on the right dam to Arcole. His task was to cross the Alpone River and seize the San Bonifacio village. This would put Alvinci's corps in a very vulnerable position. But as soon as the French approached the bridge near Arcole, they learned that 2 Austrian battalions and several cannons were guarding this bridge. Nevertheless, the French decided to attack immediately. Brigadier General Verdier headed the grenadiers in the bridge attack. However, as soon as the French approached the bridge, they were met by strong enemy fire. Eventually, Verdier had to retreat with serious losses. Seizing Arcole became an extremely difficult and dangerous undertaking. However, there was no way back for the French. Brigadier General Bonn headed in the new attack on the bridge, and once again, the Austrians, using guns, successfully repelled the French assault. As a result, General Bonn was severely wounded and his soldiers retreated. But even that didn't break the French. The bravest, General Lannes, headed another assault on Arcole. Leading the 51st Half Brigade, he rushed the bridge. However, these brave men also were met with a volley of buckshot. Consequently, Lannes and all the officers that were going among the first together with him received horrible wounds. The French position worsened because as each hour passed, the Austrians received reinforcements. But despite the deadly danger, the French generals did not stop to attack Arcole. Our most glorious generals headed the assault columns one after another. They personally moved ahead and called the others to follow them. They screamed at their soldiers, begged them, but no one followed them. Bonn, Lannes, Verdier, they all returned with serious injuries. Then Division General Augereau headed the assault column. He grabbed the war flag and personally walked towards the bridge with the words, "Cowards, are you afraid of death that much?" However, even the division's commander's valor could not bring the soldiers to the attack. They thought it was impossible to cross that bridge. And at that moment of indecisiveness, Bonaparte arrived at the battlefield. To everyone's amazement, he decided to head the assault on the bridge personally. Practically all officers decided to follow Bonaparte on Arcole's assault. Even Lannes, wounded twice, stood up from his stretcher to join the assault. Not having enough strength to stand on his own 2 feet, he arrived at Arcole by horse. Thus, taking the war flag, Bonaparte headed the column and went ahead. When only tens of yards were left to the bridge, one of the officers who were near Bonaparte had a nervous breakdown. He stood in the way of the commander-in-chief and started begging him not to go on that bridge. "My general, you will be killed. Without you, we're lost too. You cannot go ahead any further. You don't belong there." As a result of the confusion, the column stopped practically right by the bridge. The Austrian cannoneers used this confusion, and the volley of cannons started sounding within a few moments. The flurry of buckshot hit the column directly, causing terrible damage. Many soldiers and officers were killed on the spot. However, the Austrians were not able to kill the French commander-in-chief. Adjutant Milan covered Bonaparte with his body. This devoted 22-year young officer sacrificed his life to save the commander-in-chief. After this horrible volley, the soldiers started to run back. In this turmoil, Bonaparte fell into the water and was saved by his loyal adjutants, who took him out and brought him to safety. Thus, all attempts of the French to seize Arcole quickly failed. Only around 7 p.m., the 3,000-man squad was finally able to force the river near Albaredo and get to the rear of Arcole. This forced the Austrians to retreat, and as a result, by the end of that day, the French seized Arcole nearly without any fight. However, that victory took 6 hours longer than expected. By that time, Alvinci concentrated nearly all his troops around San Bonifacio. Hence, Bonaparte's initial plan, which presupposed breaking through the enemy's rear stronghold, has become practically pointless. Nevertheless, the first day of the battle wasn't without success. The menace to Verona faded away, and it seemed like Alvinci refused the hope of a quick reunion with the corps of Davidovich. Moreover, the news that the commander-in-chief personally led the soldiers to attack Arcole had fantastically increased the morale of the French army. The troops were filled again with the decisiveness and desire to fight. In this way, the French, despite anything, wanted to continue the battle. On the evening of November 15th, Bonaparte came up with a new plan. Now, the French task was not to attack the Austrians at the rear, but to lure them into swampy lands where their outnumbering wasn't important anymore. In this situation, troops would have to fight on narrow dams, and only the soldiers' personal bravery and stamina would be a decisive factor in this battle. In addition, there was another menace. Bonaparte, fearing the breakthrough of the northern flank by Davidovich's troops, ordered to leave Arcole, which cost him so much blood, and move the army to the Adige River's right bank to have a possibility to come to Vaubois' aid quickly. The situation with the front's northern sector was clear only after the adjutant of General Vaubois, appearing late at night to Bonaparte, reported to him that the northern sector was under control. So, making sure that Davidovich's soldiers didn't break through, Bonaparte adopted the final decision to continue the fight with Alvinci. In the early morning, General Alvinci sent his troops to Ronco, believing that the French were retreating. However, that was exactly what Bonaparte expected. As soon as the Austrians were on dams, Masséna's division counterattacked with full decisiveness. The famous 32nd Half Brigade was in the thick of the fight, led by General Gardon. He ordered his soldiers not to shoot, but to use bayonets only. At the same time, on the right dam, Augereau's soldiers attacked Mitrovsky's division. Verdier's grenadiers that were moving in the avant-garde defeated everyone in their way. Eventually, by noon, the French were able to move the enemy back to Belfiore and Arcole. However, Alvinci didn't want to give up his positions and forwarded more and more battalions to these swamps. Alvinci recalled an old principle: when the enemy is pressed to the river, you must attack it. But he forgot another not less important rule: when you outnumber the enemy, you must fight with it on the open terrain, not going to rough terrain where the small number troops are almost the same strength as the large number ones. Thus the battle on the dams continued all day, and both armies fought until twilight. Immediately after the battle, Bonaparte again led his troops to the right bank of the Adige River to be prepared for any unforeseen movement on the north flank. Bonaparte's concerns weren't in vain, because that night he received news that Vaubois' division retreated from Rivoli. It became obvious that the northern flank was on the verge of defeat, and Bonaparte had very little time to conquer Alvinci. However, despite the critical situation in the northern sector of the front, Bonaparte adopted the decision to finish Alvinci. General Kilmaine received the order to send 3,000 men to Ronco immediately as reinforcement. Thus, Kilmaine only had left around 5,000 soldiers to contain Wurmser's troops in Mantua. Bonaparte risked a lot because Wurmser had a great chance to break through from the fortress. Nevertheless, Bonaparte took that risk. The order to join the battle was also received by a small French garrison, which was located at Legnago. So as to lure the Austrians to the dams again, Bonaparte disseminated false information that the French had started to retreat to Mantua. Thus, Bonaparte scheduled the decisive battle for November 17th. At dawn on November 17th, misled Alvinci again sent his troops to Ronco to get after the French. But the French didn't think to retreat. In a moment, the signal to attack sounded, "En avant!" and Masséna's division rushed into attack through the morning mist. The heavy fight began again. Despite terrible tiredness, the French fought devotedly. Shocked, Alvinci threw nearly all his troops at the dams. As a result, Masséna found himself in difficult situations, but despite this, he continued to lead the troops, lifting his hat on the end of his saber as if it were a war flag. The 32nd Half Brigade was particularly distinguished in the battle. Hiding behind the dam in the bushes, the soldiers of Half Brigade allowed the enemy to approach as close as possible and then unexpectedly threw themselves into the attack. and nearly completely crushed the 3,000-man Austrian squad. So, after Massena distracted the enemy's main forces toward himself, Bonaparte started the flank attack. Augereau's division forced the river near Albaredo and attacked the Austrians on the eastern bank of the river Alpone. This attack coincided with the arrival of reinforcements from Lagnago. Bonaparte also threw General Kilmain's reinforcements into battle. Despite tremendous tiredness, the French continued to attack in all directions, showing unparalleled courage. At around 5 p.m., Massena and Augereau, acting together, captured Arcole. This forced the Austrians to retreat to San Bonifacio again. As a result, by the end of the third day of the Battle of Attrition, Alvinci lost his temper and commanded the soldiers to retreat to Vincenza. Thus, the 3-day Battle of Arcole ended with a victory for Bonaparte. It was a true feat of the French soldiers' endurance. The losses of both armies were huge. The French lost about 4,500 men. The Austrians lost 7,000. Dead, wounded, and POWs. Despite still outnumbering the French, the Austrian army no longer had enough morale or physical power left to continue the fight with Bonaparte. On the day after the battle, the French went to help Vaubois. However, as soon as Davidovich found out about the approaching Bonaparte army, he hastily retreated back to the north. Thus, Bonaparte again prevented a catastrophe despite being outnumbered by the enemy. The victory in the Battle of Arcole was Bonaparte's greatest achievement at that time. His actions and tactics in this particular case were the actions and tactics of the world's greatest master of the military art. They were all conceived and performed lightning fast, and the Austrians did not have a clue of what he was doing. Citizens, I am so tired that I cannot even tell you the details of the Battle of Arcole. It was a fight to the death. The generals manifested unparalleled bravery. There was no one among them whose clothes would not be covered with blood. The Battle of Arcole made a huge impression on the entirety of Europe. For many people, it was gradually becoming obvious that the French Republic was winning this war. Nevertheless, the members of the Directory, who became tired of the war, decided to use a favorable moment at the Italian front and offer the Austrians a truce. For this purpose, the Directory sent General Clark to Vienna, who was to negotiate with the Austrians about the truce and further peaceful congress. However, the Austrians still did not consider themselves defeated and therefore showed an absolute unwillingness to reach a compromise. The successes of Archduke Karl on the Rhine front still instilled confidence in the Austrians that they could overcome the French in this war. As a result, the Austrian government refused to accept General Clark in Vienna. The Austrians would only allow the truce negotiations if they were given the right to bring food and supplies for the garrison in Mantua without let or hindrance. Bonaparte was against these conditions. He categorically refused any truce that would not include a condition of Mantua capitulation. He was absolutely assured that the Austrians would only use this truce as an occasion to strengthen their army and continue their offensive. Bonaparte was persistent in convincing the Directory members that he had enough power to force the capitulation of Mantua and receive the final victory. However, General Clark, who arrived at Bonaparte's headquarters, had another opinion. After the Battle of Arcole, Bonaparte was in a state of extreme physical exhaustion. Such a condition of the commander-in-chief made General Clark doubt that the French army was going to succeed if the campaign continued. He is so exhausted that he is even incapable of mounting a horse without suffering, and he has become extremely skinny. His face is very pale, and his appearance is sickly. Nevertheless, despite everything, Bonaparte did manage to convince the Directory that he could get the decisive victory. So, after the failed negotiations, the Austrians started active war preparations. Archduke Karl again sent new reinforcements to Alvinci. Also, volunteer battalions were sent to Italy, as well as a part of Vienna's garrison. The Austrians mobilized all their reserves. Thanks to these urgent measures, Alvinci had 48,000 soldiers by January 1797 for a new offensive. In addition, the Austrians managed to win over the Pope again. Despite the truce that he had concluded with the French, Pope Pius VI also started mobilizing his troops to distract the French army's attention and, in this manner, support the offensive operation of the Austrians. Alvinci was in a great hurry because the supplies of Mantua nearly ran out and the garrison was in very poor condition. It was clear that the Austrians only had one last attempt left to save the garrison of the fortress. Meanwhile, despite difficulties, Bonaparte continued preparations for the upcoming battle. Having received several new brigades as reinforcement, he formed a new division headed by General Ray. Also, personal changes were made in the army. Old and incapable generals were removed from command and replaced by young and energetic officers. In total, Bonaparte had 47,000 soldiers. 10,000 of them were forced to block the troops of Wurmser in Mantua. Also, realizing that a decisive battle was ahead, Bonaparte decided to call on the local population. It is time when Italy will take its place among great nations. Lombardy, Bologna, Modena, and Ferrara will one day amaze the entirety of Europe and will bring Italy's greatest days. To arms, Italians! Let the tyrants and enemies of our freedom tremble. Thus, in early January 1797, Alvinci started his offensive operation with all his powers. The decisive battle for Italy began. On January 8th, Augereau's division was the first to get seriously assaulted on the front's eastern sector. The pressure from the Austrians was so powerful that Augereau retreated to Legnano and asked Bonaparte for help. Very soon it became known that the enemy was also progressing toward Verona. This sector of the front was protected by Bassano. Also on that day, Bonaparte received a message from Joubert that he was attacked in the Adige Valley. Thus, the French were attacked from 3 directions. Being in his headquarters in Verona, Bonaparte received reports every 2 hours from his generals and meticulously analyzed every sector of the front. The most important task was to define the main direction of Alvinci's attack. Inform me as soon as possible if you think that the enemy on your front has over 9,000 men. It is of absolute importance that I know whether the attack on you is serious or is it just a diversion to fool us. In these hours, Bonaparte believed that the enemy's main strike should be expected from the east against Augereau's troops. However, on the evening of January 13th, finally, new news arrived from Joubert. The attacks, on which he informed earlier, grew into a massive assault. He was outflanked by superior forces and had to retreat to Rivoli to avoid being surrounded. Joubert's report did not leave any doubts in Bonaparte's mind about Alvinci's plan. It became clear that the Austrians were attacking from several directions, but they planned to make the main strike on the north. The enemy defined the movement. All their soldiers are heading toward Rivoli. Bonaparte immediately reacted. Having ordered Joubert to hold on as long as possible, he promptly galloped to Rivoli. The divisions of Bassano and Ray, as well as Victor's reserves, also headed there. Verona's defense was only given to a small garrison. Augereau opposed General Provera's corps. Bonaparte arrived at Rivoli on the night of January 14th. The moon shone brightly. I ascended several heights and observed the lines of the enemy's fires, which filled the whole country between the Adige and Lake Garda and reddened the atmosphere. I clearly distinguished 5 camps, each composed of a column which had commenced their movements the preceding day. Alvinci split his army into many columns. 3 central columns had to attack the northern part of the Rivoli plateau. 2 more columns had to outflank the French. At this time, 7,000 soldiers commanded by Quasdanovich, supported by cavalry and artillery, had to move along the Adige River in the gorge to make a decisive strike. Thus, by maneuvering on a vast area of land, the Austrians' columns had to surround the French completely. Alvinci was not aware that Bonaparte arrived at Rivoli at night. Therefore, he planned to start the battle around 10 a.m., when all the columns gathered at the battlefield. The main disadvantage of Alvinci's plan was the hard coordination of 6 attacking columns, which were moving along the snaking and narrow mountain roads, and unfortunately for Alvinci, Bonaparte immediately understood this. In this position, he decided to hold the Rivoli plateau and slow the movement of Quasdanovich to the gorge no matter what, preventing his exit to the plateau. For this, it was extremely important to seize and hold the chapel of San Marco, which towered above the gorge. By blocking the entrance to the gorge in this manner, Bonaparte wanted to concentrate all his power on the central columns and crush them before the rest of the columns got to the battlefield. He had to act urgently, or otherwise all the Austrians' columns would complete their maneuvers and surround the French. At this moment, Bonaparte had about 10,000 soldiers, 12 cannons, and several regiments of cavalry. The rest of the divisions were hurrying in the forced march to Rivoli. So, not waiting for reinforcements, the commander-in-chief ordered an attack. At 4 a.m., Joubert's division moved ahead with decisiveness. In less than 30 minutes, the French half-brigade, led by Brigadier General Vial, seized the chapel of San Marco and all the adjacent heights in the assault. Thus, they effectively blocked the passage through the gorge. The rest of the troops took their positions on the heights of the Rivoli plateau. Such an early attack from the French was a complete surprise for Alvinci because he didn't know about Bonaparte's arrival and thought he only dealt with one of the French divisions. Nevertheless, Alvinci very quickly put his army on alert, and at 6 a.m., 3 central Austrian columns descended from the mountains to attack the French on the plateau. Thus, Bonaparte reached a very important goal. With a decisive morning attack, he forced Alvinci to start battle before his other columns arrived. Meanwhile, in the Rivoli Plateau's center, an intense battle between 3 columns that had 12,000 men led by Alvinci and 8,000 men in the division of Joubert started. Narrow passages to the chapel of San Marco made the Austrians' attacks on Joubert's right flank division harder. However, on the Rivoli Plateau, the French position was difficult. Seeing that they outnumbered the enemy, the Austrian battalions were attacking very fiercely. During another attack, several Austrian battalions outflanked the French positions and made an attack on the 29th Half Brigade. Simultaneously with the flank attack, the Austrians increased the attack power on the front. Eventually, the 29th Half Brigade subdued to the pressure and started to retreat chaotically. The 85th Half Brigade, standing nearby, seeing this, also started to panic and left its positions in the center. The entire center of the French shook. Bonaparte didn't have the necessary reserves at this moment to correct the position. However, at this very critical moment, Bassano arrived at the battlefield. This brave general informed the others that his division would arrive any minute. This news encouraged the soldiers and prevented them from panicking. Finally, around 10 a.m., the 32nd Half Brigade appeared on the battlefield. It was followed by the 75th Half Brigade. Bonaparte immediately sent reinforcements to the center to help Joubert. what fine troops were the 32nd and the 75th. It was the first time that I had seen any of Masséna's army corps marching to meet the enemy. There was something so firm, so formidable in their bearing that one felt that marching to battle with them was marching to victory. It is needless to say that the column composed of 3 Austrian battalions was overthrown and put to flight, that it lost 100 prisoners of war in addition to killed and wounded. Thus, thanks to a very timely arrival of reinforcements, Bonaparte managed to regain the lost positions in the center and again push the enemy's infantry to the foothill. At this time, the Austrian columns that were outflanking the French started to approach the battlefield. Despite that, Bonaparte was persistently striking the center of the enemy, not paying much attention to the flank menace. However, the position grew more threatening. On the left flank, Lusignan's column was approaching Offi. On the right flank, Lukasevich already reached Cheraino's neighborhood and started firing cannons on the 39th Half Brigade sent to protect the gorge. Additionally, Quosdanovich's troops started to attack the French infantry at the gorge's exit. As a result, Joubert's infantry, which was attacked from 3 directions, was forced to leave their positions on the right flank. The Austrian infantry in the center watched the exit of Quosdanovich's troops from the gorge and applauded, thinking they were victorious. Obviously, for the French, it was a critical moment in the battle. However, Bonaparte, amid the turmoil and rumbling of the battle, kept a cool head. Through perfect tactical intuition, he concluded that the central columns of the enemy were now exhausted and did not have the necessary attacking potential. Based on this conclusion, Bonaparte chose to regroup his troops in the center and make a concentrated attack against Quosdanovich's troops emerging from the gorge. Following Bonaparte's order, General Joubert immediately regrouped his brigades against the threat on the eastern sector. Additionally, all the available artillery was formed in one battery and put to face the gorge. Thus, as soon as the vanguard of Quosdanovich's column emerged from the gorge on the Rivoli plateau, Joubert's infantry attacked them in the front. At the same time, the French artillery started shooting point blank at the enemy's tight. This devastating firepower struck first on the advancing Austrian cavalry dragoons, who broke and stampeded through their own infantry, causing mass chaos. Moreover, thanks to the precise French hit, 2 Austrian carts of ammunition exploded, which caused immense losses. In the minute of complete confusion, Bonaparte threw all his cavalry to attack, led by Leclerc and Lassalle.
Sabre à la main!
And in a matter of seconds, close cavalry squadrons hit the Austrians at full speed and completely scattered their rows. In a short time, the vanguard of Quosdanovich's column was thrown back to the gorge and crushed. The rest of the troops haphazardly retreated back along the gorge. Lassalle's cavalry attack was a complete success. Thus, Bonaparte successfully overcame the battle's decisive crisis. His enemy's center was crushed, and now the French could deal with the flank columns. Meanwhile, Colonel Lusignan, not being informed about the defeat of Alvinci, kept going further and further to the rear of the French army. However, pretty soon, the last of Bonaparte's reserve showed itself from the rear. It was General Rey's division. The Austrians tried to oppose it, but in vain. Eventually, in less than an hour, the 5,000 large Austrian corps were fully crushed. Only the corps' commander, with a handful of officers, managed to escape. By 5 p.m., the victory was nearly secured. However, Bonaparte didn't have time to rest. After noon, the message arrived that Provera's corps crossed the Adige River and was approaching Mantua. In this situation, Bonaparte, having made sure that his enemy was retreating, passed the command of the troops to Joubert and rushed south with General Masséna's heroic brigades to prevent the Austrians from getting close to Mantua. Joubert acquired a heavy responsibility because Alvinci decided to continue the battle. The second phase of the Battle of Rivoli was on January 15th, and Joubert completely met Bonaparte's expectations. Personally, heading the frontal attack, he completely crushed the leftovers of Alvinci columns. In the meantime, General Provera, using the spreading out of Austria's division, broke through to the neighborhoods of Mantua. However, the passages to the fortress were securely blocked by Serurier's soldiers, and despite all of Provera's efforts, he wasn't able to break through to the fortress that day. A decisive assault was planned by the Austrians on January 16th. At dawn the next day, Wurmser tried to make another sortie out of the fortress to try to unite with Provera's troops, but at this moment, Bonaparte appeared in the Austrian rear guard together with Masseno's division. As a result, all of the Austrian attacks were repulsed, and Provera's corps turned out to be in an absolutely hopeless position. After short negotiations, Provera was forced to surrender to the French together with his 6,000 soldiers. Again, the French demonstrated exceptional endurance. For 120 hours, Masseno's soldiers took part in 3 battles and walked 54 miles. This required amazing valor, and the division's commander undoubtedly earned his future title of Duke of Rivoli. The defeat of Albinci's army meant the undoubtful capitulation of Mantua. Without any hope of help, Wurmser was able to hold this fortress until the end of the month, but on February 2nd, 1797, this large fortress finally fell into French hands. Bonaparte, by rights, gave the honor of accepting capitulation to General Serurier, and acknowledging Wurmser's bravery allowed him to exit the fortress as a free man with all military honors. In this way, Bonaparte was able to reach unheard-of-before results. Over 5 days of battles and maneuvers, only 13,000 fleeing soldiers were left from the 48,000-strong Albinci's army. Additionally, the French finally seized the Mantua fortress, capturing 16,000 of Wurmser's soldiers as POWs, with 500 cannons and 60 banners. It was a complete defeat of the Austrian army. When he greeted his soldiers with another victory, Bonaparte told them, "The Roman legions walked 24 miles a day. You can walk 30 miles a day and fight instead of rest." The victory in the Battle of Rivoli and Mantua's capitulation finally decided Italy's fate. However, Bonaparte didn't want to stop there. Now he was very soon going to strike the very heart of his enemy. Vienna was overcome with panic. The fall of the Mantua fortress dramatically changed the situation on the front. Now the French army wasn't held back by anything, and Bonaparte could fully plan the offensive actions. Since that time, the Italian front has been completely defined as the main one, and the members of the Directory sent Italy large reinforcements without any doubts. 2 divisions were heading to help Bonaparte in the first echelon, headed by Bernadotte and Dilmas. The total number of reinforcements sent to Italy was about 30,000 men. However, Bonaparte didn't waste time while waiting for the reinforcements. A division of General Victor consisting of 8,000 men immediately moved to the Papal States after the seizure of the Mantua fortress to deal with the Pope and force him into a truce. On February 2nd, the Pope's troops tried to stop the French advancement, but were crushed in their very first battle. The soldiers of Pope Pius VI were so frightened that they didn't even think of resisting. Pope Pius VI promptly acknowledged the futility of resisting, and in Tolentino on February 19th, he finally signed the truce agreement, agreeing to Bonaparte's conditions. In addition to the contribution of 30 million francs, Pope Pius VI also gave the French his most valuable territories, including Bologna and Modena. He also closed all the seaports of the Papal States to the English vessels and refused all the unions directed against the French Republic. I am 3 days from Rome. I will return to the army as soon as I finish negotiations with the Pope. Pius VI saves Rome, yielding us his richest possessions. This agreement will give us material resources for a great campaign. Thus, all the issues with Pope Pius VI were successfully dealt with, and Bonaparte aimed all his efforts at his main enemy. By mid-February, the reinforcements sent by the Directory started arriving in Italy. In addition, volunteers kept on enrolling in the army. Not only Italians were among them. Polish patriots who dreamt of the restoration of their country decided to join the French and fight against the Imperials. General Dombrowski arrived in Italy to help Bonaparte form the Polish legions. The Polish people, hope unites us. France is winning. It fights for the cause of all nations. Friends, Polish legions are created in Italy, so let us unite the ranks of those who fight for the common cause of the peoples, for freedom under the command of valiant Bonaparte. And one day our fellow countrymen will meet us in our motherland, which we once left in tears. Meanwhile, despite a difficult situation on the front, the Austrian government didn't want to negotiate and started gathering another army, entrusting command to its best commander, Archduke Karl. Having arrived at Innsbruck on February 6th, he actively started organizing an army. Bonaparte had immense respect for his enemy and, despite outnumbering him, planned his offensive with maximal discretion. The Directory, as before, thought it would be worth starting an offensive in Italy if and when Moreau's army could force the Rhine River. Bonaparte didn't agree with this plan. He wasn't going to wait for anybody, because in the case of any delay, the French could lose the advantages they gained after the victory in the Battle of Rivoli. By the end of February, Archduke Karl was only able to gather 35,000 soldiers. However, the Austrians didn't stop mobilization, and in the next 2 months, the number of men in the Austrian army would rise to 60,000. Therefore, everything spoke in favor of an early offensive, and Bonaparte, not waiting for additional instructions from the Directory, on March 10th ordered to start the attack. General Joubert, in charge of the corps of 19,000 soldiers, which consisted of 3 divisions, moved to Tyrol to ensure this sector's safety at the front. The task assigned to General Joubert became more difficult because, in any case, the French couldn't afford to provoke the local population to start a guerrilla war. The soldiers were again reminded that for any material or physical damage to the locals, they would immediately be arrested and shot. Meanwhile, the main corps, consisting of 30,000 soldiers led by Bonaparte, was moving toward the Tagliamento River. This place had the Austrians' main line of defense, where they focused the main part of the army. The main force's left flank was covered by Masseno's division, which headed north for Bassano. In an emergency, this division could promptly help in any sector of the front. About 60,000 men in total were involved in Bonaparte's offensive. Archduke Karl had no more than 35,000 soldiers in the line of defense. However, if he could hold on for 3 or 4 weeks, he would be able to increase the number of soldiers in his army significantly. Thus, on March 16th, Bonaparte's divisions approached the Tagliamento River after having thrown back the enemy's vanguards. The water level in the river hadn't risen too much yet, making it possible for the French to wade across it, and Bonaparte, without delays, sent his divisions ahead. Archduke Karl attempted several counterattacks, but that didn't stop the advancing columns. The French significantly outnumbered Austrians, and commanders showed exceptional tactical skills. All maneuvers were carried out in strict order and with amazing accuracy. Eventually, after several hours of fighting, Bernadotte's division seized the enemy foothold on the opposite bank of the river, and all Austrian hopes to stop Bonaparte in his advancement vanished. Having lost 500 men and 6 cannons, Archduke Karl was forced to retreat. Massena was also advancing with the same success. Having crushed Lusignan's division, he forced the Tagliamento River and started threatening the Austrian army's right flank. Thus, having crossed the river, the French continued to mercilessly pursue the Austrians, inflicting heavy losses. On March 18th, the French captured the powerful fortress of Palmanova. Bonaparte then sent Bernadotte's division to Laibach. Meanwhile, with the rest of his troops, he went to Tarbes to seize an important mountain pass, which opened the way to Klagenfurt. The Austrians also acknowledged the importance of this position and invested all of their efforts in the protection of this mountain pass. From March 19th to March 23rd, very fierce battles were ongoing on these mountain heights. Archduke Karl tried his best to hold Tarbes, but the French were unstoppable. Having crushed Bayeulach's division, Bonaparte's soldiers broke through the mountains and, on March 29th, entered Klagenfurt. Having lost all hope of stopping the French, the Austrians started to retreat in all directions. Archduke Karl had lost over 10,000 men since March 16th. All this time, the citizens of Vienna were in huge panic. The city authorities started preparing for an immediate evacuation to Prague. However, later events took an unexpected turn. As soon as Bonaparte arrived at Klagenfurt, he received a letter from the Directory which said that the French troops on the Rhine were still on the left bank of the river and that he could not expect prompt help from Moreau's army. In this position, it was highly risky to advance to Vienna because the powers that Bonaparte had at the time were clearly not enough to capture the enemy's capital. At the same time, Bonaparte wasn't going to stand still and wait until Moreau's army arrived. On March 31st, Bonaparte sent a letter from Klagenfurt to Archduke Karl, in which he offered to stop the bloodshed and finally start peace negotiations. Mr. Commander-in-Chief, brave soldiers fight in this war, but they want peace. Isn't this war going on for 6 long years now? Haven't enough lives been destroyed? Hasn't it produced enough evil and suffering for humanity? I hear from all sides calls to peace. Europe, which raised its weapons against the French Republic, has already put them down. Only your nation alone remains standing, but there will be much more bloodshed. Whatever the outcome, we will kill tens of thousands of people. Wouldn't it be better to end it all in a peace accord? Everything must have its limit, even hatred. As for me, Mr. Commander-in-Chief, if this offer that I am honored to make saves even one life, I will be more proud of that achievement than I am proud of all sorrowful glory that I received on the battlefield. Archduke Karl responded to Bonaparte that since he was not authorized to negotiate the end of the war, he must refuse the truce offer. Under these circumstances, to pressure the Austrians and force them to consider peace, Bonaparte made a swift march to Leoben, which he took on April 7th. The French army was now only 90 miles from Vienna. Also, Bonaparte ordered the rest of his divisions to concentrate in Klagenfurt. Such decisive actions by Bonaparte were highly convincing, and on that very same day, the Austrian parliamentarians arrived at Leoben and asked to stop the war actions. Bonaparte didn't wait for a Directory representative and held negotiations on behalf of the French Republic on his own. The Directory was very dissatisfied with Bonaparte's overly high independence, but it couldn't do much about it. Eventually, on April 18th, during very complex negotiations in Leoben, the parties signed an agreement to stop the war actions. In this agreement, they put Bonaparte's demands for preliminary conditions, which would be the basis for the future peace agreement. According to them, the Austrians had to cede all their possessions in the Netherlands to the French, as well as those on the left bank of the Rhine River, which were de facto controlled by the French. In addition, the Austrians acknowledged the Cisalpine Republic created by Bonaparte, which was tightly connected to France with Union treaties, as well as the Ligurian Republic. As compensation, the Austrians received nearly all of the Republic of Venice's territories except for the Ionian Islands, which were ceded to France. Thus, all the war actions were stopped, but the negotiations on the final approval of the truce conditions continued for several months. All this time, Bonaparte stayed in Italy and lived in the luxurious palace of Mombello near Milano. For a while, Lombardy was perceived as the center of Europe. Many politicians, diplomats, bankers, and secular ladies arrived there. Bonaparte also welcomed various renowned scientists into his palace, including mathematician Monge and chemist Berthollet. So frequently, besides banquets and feasts, the evenings were filled with conversations with scientists. Finally, on October 18, 1797, the peace conditions offered by Bonaparte were approved, and near the village of Campo Formio, they signed the peace treaty that ended the war on the European continent. It was the end of Bonaparte's legendary First Italian campaign. On December 7th, Napoleon Bonaparte brought a long-awaited peace treaty to Paris, and the Directory in full solemnly met him in the Luxembourg Palace. A significant number of people gathered near the palace to see the young general in person. In less than a year, he had brought an exemplary Austrian army to its knees and brought peace to France. The time when the young republic is achieving these victories over ancient despotism is a great and splendid era for Europe. For Napoleon, it was the purest, most brilliant period of his life. In just 1 year, leading a tiny army that lacked everything, he pushed the Austrians from the Mediterranean coast to the Carinthian Mountains, scattered and destroyed all the armies that the Austrian ruling house sent one after another to Italy, and granted peace to the European continent. None of the commanders of the ancient or modern world have achieved so many great victories in such a short time, with such limited resources, and against such a powerful adversary. In 1 year, a young man of just 26 years old eclipsed such commanders as Alexander the Great, Caesar, Hannibal, and Frederick the Great.